Hello and welcome to A Magical Egypt Live with Venice McNeil. Today I interview Dr. Jack Kruse. And because of a miscommunication about timing, because I'm in the Southern Hemisphere and in the future, I ended up interviewing Dr. Jack in my pajamas without my hair combed. And because he was also without a camera, this is going to be an audio interview only. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoy the content of this conversation. Dr. Jack is a respected neurosurgeon and is CEO of the Kruse Longevity Center in Destin, Florida. I found Dr. Kruse on Clubhouse, and he was chatting about how Bitcoin in many ways emulates the biological activity of an organism. And so effectively by watching the Bitcoin hash rate, you can get an indication of its health in any moment in time. I found it fascinating. At that time, people also asked him questions that were health related. And the answers that he gave, I found intuitive, intriguing, and contrary to much of what I've learned, which is always a healthy sign. Dr. Jack explores the deep connection between thermodynamics in biology and the processing of energy and information. As part of his work, he demonstrates that obesity begins in the eye and not with food and exercise, which I find fascinating. He also looks at how light, water, and magnetism affect the computations that mitochondria must make to build wellness within. As a preliminary review of his work, I recommend the podcast by a boy named Pseu, P-S-E-U, which is both on Spotify and YouTube, as much of what we discuss assumes familiarity with this foundation material. You can also subscribe to Dr. Kruze's Patreon, where there is a plethora of information if you're interested in learning more about this subject at all. And you can join him on Clubhouse and me on Clubhouse, as he spends quite a lot of time in there and I will be stalking him. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Darling, can you hear me?
Now I can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry, sweetie. I missed that message altogether.
Yeah, I put it on actually yesterday and I didn't hear anything today. I just came off the beach. So I figured I was sitting here listening, actually doing some homework. I'm writing a blog for Patreon tomorrow that's probably going to blow people's minds about the quantum Zeno effect and how it affects cells and actually Bitcoin. So it should be pretty interesting.
You know what? I really love the fact that you have those two different, very disparate fields kind of overlapping each other. I think it's quite amazing.
Actually, to be honest with you, I don't think they're disparate at all. I think they're actually one and the same. And I think most people don't realize that what Bitcoin and really quantum biology do is actually give us our freedom and actually give us time back. And when it comes to the quantum Zeno effect, I know a lot of people do not know what that effect is, but some of the queer things that biology does, like for example, when light hits a leaf, it makes sugar out of CO2, water, and sunlight. But the process that actually it does it is something called an exciton. Exciton is actually when light hits an electron, the electron actually leaves its spot, then always gets to the reaction center before time expires. It's kind of like this amazing game. And what people don't realize is that the quantum Zeno effect allows us to slow time down in biology. But the quantum Zeno effect only works when the interaction, meaning when you look at light and the subatomic particle, it has to be constantly monitored, meaning observed. So the story they talk about in quantum mechanics when they try to explain this to people like Schrodinger's cat. You open the box, you find out when you open the box whether the cat is dead or alive. Well, it turns out in quantum mechanics of a leaf, or the quantum mechanics of, say, your blood, your red blood cell, or even in your mitochondria, the same thing is true. The way we slow time down is there's proteins, lipids, carbohydrates inside the cell that constantly monitor the interaction of this exciton to see where it goes, and it always gets to the reaction center before the light energy has a chance to thermalize in the leaf, meaning loses its energy to the environment or to something else in the leaf. And the thing is, that's actually how the second law of thermodynamics gets skirted. And that's the reason why there's so many, sorry about that. There's so many people throughout history that have always said that to understand life, especially physics, physicists, I should say, to understand life, you really have to understand that somehow life skirts the second law of thermodynamics. And this is like, it's almost a heretical thing to say, because anything that skirts the second law of thermodynamics is believed to be impossible. And it turns out that life seemingly is impossible when you look at it in the box until you understand the quantum dance that's done at this small scale. And the quantum Zeno effect is one of those things. Basically, what it says is that we can slow time down as long as we observe the particle constantly. And conversely, the flip side is also true. If you don't observe the particle very much, you have an anti-quantum Zeno effect, which makes time speed up, which kind of makes people's heads hurt when they hear it the first time. But the crazy thing is, when I explain to people how it happens in a cell, I think that's the thing that really bothers people. And I always show a picture of both chlorophyll and hemoglobin, and show people that basically these chemicals are almost identical. They do the exact same thing. They just function a little bit differently. One is in plants, the other one is in animals. The interesting thing is nobody ever gets that the same thing happens in Satoshi's white paper. And that's the freaky part.
Well, look, I mean, put it this way, in terms of like photosynthesis, I was watching a video the other day about photosynthesis essentially in humans, and the connection between the water in the cells and the light hitting it, and a different interpretation of E equals mc squared, that when the light hits the water slows the particle down, and it turns into the energy there, right? The energy for metabolism, which I think is that kind of what you're referring to?
That's a little bit different. I actually talk about that process in a video that I did in Vermont. I have a Vermont series. There's 3 years. They're on YouTube. They're free to watch. The one in 2016 talks about actually how photosynthesis works, as foods are basically a barcode, an electromagnetic barcode that mitochondria actually decipher. So they're the ciphers of that system. 2017 actually tells you how the signal through the eye and the skin is codified in the hypothalamus, in the leptin receptor. And that's actually how your body, as the cipher, as the computer, is changed by the light being like the epigenetic software of nature that's decentralized. And you are the hardware. And the hardware function is changed by the light programming. And people need to understand that's actually kind of really what's happened. That's how we're designed to work in a decentralized system. The problem is the beliefs that we have through medicine, the beliefs that we have through conventional teaching of children through their whole life, is that the outside system doesn't affect us. We have defects in us. In other words, we have disease, or we don't react that way. The defect is in our RNA and DNA. And it turns out modern science says that's exactly wrong. And that whole paradigm of belief really began with Darwin in 1859 with the origin of species, but it was really hardwired probably by Watson and Crick in 1953 when they discovered DNA. And that paradigm still persists in biology and medicine to this very day. And that's the reason why when I explain to people how food is an electromagnetic barcode of, the solar cycle, it kind of like blows the whole paradigm apart.
Oh, look. I mean, your information is just revelatory, and it's so fantastic. And look, just to give you some context, Magical Egypt, we are decoding kind of a science of the ancients, utilizing the art and architecture, and we've seen that there is a huge focus on the brain and the functions of the brain. And there's also a huge focus on the sun. And when you made your comment about Be the Sphinx, it just tickled my fancy incredibly, because the way that you described, being grounded and looking at the sunrise, I think that that's just phenomenal advice. And a lot of this ancient knowledge is kind of seeping back into modern science. And you mentioned the fact that you're a heretic, and I think that's what we need. That's what we need to move forward, my love. But let's talk a little bit more. You mentioned that Bitcoin is an organism.
Yes.
So elaborate on that for me a little, or for my audience.
I mean, you need to understand that Bitcoin functionally, when you really look at it, because obviously it's not a sentient being in the true sense that you and I are, but the algorithm itself has its own biology, and it's codified in the white paper that Satoshi wrote. One of the interesting things about the white paper, when you read it, is Satoshi, his main idea was to create a perfect monetary system that could act as a currency, a store of value, be fungible. It could transcend both space and time. It could do many things that other currencies that man has created would not be able to do. The single most important thing that the white paper did do that I don't believe most people in the crypto world or actually in the biology world understand is that the algorithm in Bitcoin contains a mechanism that mimics the quantum Zeno effect to shrink time down to create value. So to explain this to you very simply, and there is a very simple way to do it. Bitcoin for 12 years has grown 230% per year. So when you understand that the asset's growing that fast, 5 years ago, if you would have bought Bitcoin and put $3,000 in, today you'd have $350,000.
Yeah.
If you would have put $3,000 in gold 5 years ago, like say gold from the King Tut's mask, the gold would be worth today $3,500. So that's $100 return a year over 5 years. And this is during a time where the deflationary rate of fiat currency is literally off the chart. And the way that's measured is people who follow economics know about the money supply of the Fed. It's called M2 money supply. Well, the M2 money supply has exploded since the last financial crisis of 2008. So
and it's exponential now. Gosh.
Correct. Now it's actually much higher than most people appreciate. When you chart fiat currency to Bitcoin right now, the inflation rate in January, February, and March of 2021 is 40, 41, and 42%. Now remember that, and this is important, inflation itself, when you measure it, is subjective to whoever the author or the person is speaking about it. But it's very clear that the M2 supply is rising much faster than fiat can provide value for the things that we buy. That's the reason why you have to spend more money, no matter what your fiat currency is, no matter what country you're in. you have to spend more to get the same goods and services you got 5 years ago. And I think most people understand that. So when you get that idea, you begin to understand that inflation is a tax. It's an invisible tax.
Yes, indeed.
That is put upon us. Well, when you think about biology, that's exactly what disease is. Disease is an invisible tax that gets put on us when we're outside the normal environment we're supposed to be in. And what happens to us? That changes the epigenetic toolbox in us so that it changes both our RNA, DNA, and our mitochondrial DNA so that we can transform energy as well as we used to in previous parts of our life. And what does that lead to? It leads to disease. What does disease functionally do to a human? It actually shrinks time. In other words, you lose lifespan, you lose health span. And when you realize this feature of health and you realize this feature in Bitcoin, the Bitcoin algorithm actually allows us to constantly observe the hash rate. And you've heard me say in the clubhouse room that the hash rate in Bitcoin is like the metabolic rate, in cells.
I thought that was brilliant. That was a revelation for me as well. It's so amazing. And it's indicative of the growth of the organism.
Right. But most people, don't realize though, the metabolic hash rate simulates, our thyroid hormone level in the body, meaning that determines how fast or slow the metabolic rate of the organism is. Obviously with Bitcoin, you want the metabolic rate extremely high. Why? Because right now, Bitcoin is like a teenager. It's growing at an unbelievable rate. It's going through puberty right now.
Yes.
It's eating all other assets. And when you understand that, the metabolic rate's higher. Here's the interesting thing, Vanessa, that you may not understand. Metabolic rate in all animals, well, I'm not just talking about humans now, I'm talking about all animals, is controlled by something called Kleiber's law. Kleiber's law basically says that energy transformation or transduction in a living system is a zero-sum game. What does that mean? I'm going to try to make this as very simple as I can because it's really important for you to understand. An elephant and a mouse have radically different lifespans in terms of time, but you'll be interested to hear this. They have the same number of heartbeats. So what does that tell you? It tells you that time in a mouse is shrunk. That's why they die in 2-3 years. Elephants tend to live 50 to 70 years. But the interesting thing is that the heart rate in both of the animals is almost exactly the same. So when you begin to understand this, heart rate is a function of physiologic work done by the cardiovascular system. You begin to realize that all energy and all living things function by this law. Most people, when they first hear about this law, they actually think when I talk about it, that it's crazy, that everything functions based on this law. It turns out it's absolutely true. There's never been any animal that's been found to break Kleiber's law. It's a metabolic growth law. Well, when you understand this law, what does that mean? It means that energy itself is a zero-sum game in biology. What am I telling people in the crypto world? That I'm telling you that Satoshi, through his algorithm, what he constructed, basically built in a circadian mechanism into the algorithm of Bitcoin that gives it its own circadian cycle, gives it its own metabolic rate that varies through the halving cycle. And the ultimate result of that is it creates a scarcity that manifests in the biology of the halving cycle of Bitcoin. And this changes with Bitcoin as Bitcoin ages. And because you've been in my rooms, in the beginning of Bitcoin, 2010, 2011, the initial miner cycle was they got 50 coins for every block that was mined. Today, they only get 6.25 coins per block that's mined. So in essence, what did we just describe, Vanessa? We just said that as Bitcoin gets older, you get less coins out than you did. What is that a function of? Well, that's actually a function of how the metabolic rate gets altered as Bitcoin ages. And it turns out the same thing happens in man and cells. As we get older, the epigenetic toolbox, the way it works with light and mitochondria, doesn't keep us looking or functioning the same as we were when we were teenagers, 20 or 30 years old. Most humans know this. All they have to do is look through their pictures of how they looked when they were 16, 26, 36, 46. This is not a shocking revelation. The interesting thing is, though, when you talk about it in reference to Bitcoin, it kind of floors people because they don't look at Bitcoin as a sentient being, but they should. Why? Because I have the belief that this algorithm, because it's the only other algorithm that I know of as a physician that is decentralized like nature is, that implies that this algorithm is capable of actually harvesting humans, meaning that human behavior will be changed by the people that plug into this monetary network because they will be subject to it, just like people who plug into nature are subject to the cycles of light and dark. Those who do it well will likely live long lives that don't require my professional services. Those who don't will require my professional services and medicine and the centralized prescriptions that we use, which comes from big pharma. And
yeah, look, I mean, just to go there for a second, there is a very dark scenario that is somewhat discussed in the future of humanity, where when we become part of the blockchain ourselves, as intelligent as these smart meters are installed in our bodies, that would very much cause changes in our behavior to earn those Bitcoins through our actions.
you have to realize that it's already happened for about 120 million people in the world. Why? Because 120 million people in the world are already plugged in to this monetary network. And I will tell you that we now, our lives actually are tied to what's going on with this metabolic hash rate. Now, you know what the key is? The key is, does that metabolic hash rate of Bitcoin define who you are as a person? Does it define me as a person? I think you've been in my clubhouse rooms long enough to know that no, it doesn't define me, but the way in which I describe Bitcoin is radically different than most other people, especially in the crypto space. But I would tell you, I look at this very much like a patient that I'm seeing. The reason why is I believe that the incentives that are built into the algorithm dictate the outcomes. What does that mean in English? What does quantum mechanics fundamentally say? That just the act of observation changes the reality we get.
Yes.
And that's exactly what Bitcoin does. People who are no coiners don't have the same idea set or reality of people that own Bitcoin. And Vanessa, you've been in there long enough. Just think about this as we talk. People who own a lot of Bitcoin have a different reality than the people who own one Bitcoin. And then people that own one Bitcoin have a different reality of those who own just Satoshis. And what's the interesting part of that? Each one of them have a different reality, but they're still tied to the same network. And it doesn't matter if you're Satoshi Basin, Bitcoin Basin, or multiple Bitcoin Basin. You see the world differently than those who are based in fiat. And it turns out that's exactly what happens in medicine. Those who are sick see the world very differently than those who are healthy.
That's so deep, Dr. Jack. I mean, look, I'm trying to, convince my girlfriends to listen to you and to get in on Bitcoin, and they really do have a completely different reality to me. And I try.
Well, maybe doing this podcast with you will actually get them to understand that this is a little bit deeper than just a monetary network. Because, most people do not believe that health and wealth are functionally linked. I've got, as of tomorrow, I'll have 23 blogs on Bitcoin on my Patreon. And I will tell you, I think when you read those blogs, you begin to see that Bitcoin means a lot more than just a monetary network. It is definitely a different kind of animal. Why? The things that it does for us and to us are radically different than anything else out there. And I really look at Bitcoin kind of like I look at the sun. The more you plug in to the sun, the more you plug into Bitcoin, you will optimize both your health and your wealth long term. And those two things are linked, because when you're wealthy, you can do things to create an environment that's great for the colony of mitochondria in your body so that you're not sick.
Yes. Look, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the Sphinx, because I'm on the same southern latitude as the Sphinx, in fact, in Australia. And what's really interesting is that I am an outdoor person and my husband is exactly the same age and he's an indoor person. And since we met, he's a nighttime person, right? So he looks 20 years older than I do. And he is aging before my eyes because he's sitting in front of a computer screen and spending all day, all day asleep. And I think the most poignant testimony to what you're talking about is if you do go back and start studying you and your YouTubes, you are actually growing younger as time goes by.
I wouldn't say that I'm growing younger, but I will tell you this, that one thing I can say pretty definitively, me considering my age, the way my brain works better than most people my age. And I will tell you the reason for that, I believe, is because I'm constantly plugged into nature. Like today, I left the beach to come do the podcast with you. And, one of the things that you did say, and I don't want to pry and I don't want to be probing, but I will tell you, you actually said something that I think a lot of people, especially on a podcast, need to hear. This is the reason why people separate and get divorced when they're married. Why? When one part of the union does things differently than the other, people don't realize that other person has a different reality than the other person. That's actually how you grow apart. And, you saw it because you said, I'm seeing this in my own husband. The thing is, there's people out there that they see it and they don't act upon it. But then there's other people that see it, they do act upon it. And what happens? They grow apart. They have less in common with the person that they married, the person they were in love with. And the thing is, people don't even realize that this has a massive biologic effect. My nurse just told me a story of one of our friends probably 2 weeks ago that really made an impact on me. I'm not going to tell you her name because she may listen to this at some point, but she got divorced. She's been divorced for about 15 years. She's still single. She's not had anybody significant in her life that whole time. And she said to my nurse, who recently got divorced about 2 years ago, she said, "You don't know how lucky you are to have somebody in your life." She goes, "I haven't had anybody in my life." And the gist of the conversation between these two women was that lady knows that this is causing her a biologic toll. In other words, she's aging and not having the same existence as somebody who has somebody in their life that cares about them. And it doesn't matter even if you don't love them, just cares about them. Somebody you can sit down and talk to and have a glass of wine with and, share dinner with, where you have some commonalities with. The thing is, it's really shameful, to be quite frank with you, that people, don't talk about this with the people that matter to them, because, people are afraid they're going to offend that other person, and you really shouldn't offend them. You should actually explain to them how doing things together in the environment actually can both keep you younger. And to me, that is really important. And I look at it like this. Many people who don't have money think that wealth solves all their problems. And I'm going to tell you, as somebody who has money, that's not true. Now, I'm fortunate because when I grew up as a poor white kid in New York, whose mother was on public assistance, I was poor and saw the opposite side of this. And I will tell you, the opposite side made me push myself to never settle for less than I deserve.
Yeah.
But now that I have probably more than I deserve, I will tell you that that is no panacea for still what the mystery of life is. And the mystery of life is that we are social primates. We're designed to make that connection with each other. And I think if we can convince humans to get into that decentralized network of nature, which is basically what the ancient Egyptians found with the sun, and have people plug into Bitcoin, which is also the only decentralized network that is around finances or a currency, that we actually can help people optimize their life this way.
So, Dr. Jack, does that mean that, look, you talked a lot that there's going to be a big run up and possibly all the way through until October. So it's very obvious to me that if we plug in, as I'm doing now on your advice, all of our spare investment into Bitcoin, then we are going to benefit from this puberty and blossoming of Bitcoin itself. But once it gets through that stage, and kind of it becomes more mature, for the people that have missed out, how do they blossom and take advantage of Bitcoin as this organic biological creature that we can interact with?
Well, what I would tell you is that I think people need to realize the simple answer is, at least on the biology side, if you follow what the ancient Egyptians talked about with Amun-Ra, the god of the sun, and learn how to use the sun properly, and follow the message that's still present in the Sphinx at the 28th latitude. Look to the east every morning, be completely grounded. And you add in the fact that you plug into the Bitcoin monetary network, you do those things religiously together, your life will be exponentially better than it is currently right now while you're listening to this podcast. And ultimately, I tell people the beautiful thing about decentralized networks, it doesn't matter when you wise up to realizing you need to connect to it. It's like the game of golf. You can hit a tee shot that goes errant. You can even hit a second shot that still sucks. But you usually have that third shot that can right the wrong. And then when you're on the green, can you make the putt? And the bottom line is, can you still do well, even though you made mistakes earlier in your life? Here's the beautiful thing I'm going to tell people. The more you plug into nature and the more you plug into Bitcoin, you right the wrongs of the things that went wrong in your life previously. That's the reason why I explain to people that nature and both Bitcoin are capable of optimizing time for you. They can give you freedoms back and time back for you to be able to do things that you didn't think were possible. And I can tell you this right now. I tell people this all the time on the biology side. There's so many stories about people I've interacted with over the 16 years when I've taught them quantum biology, of how they fixed horrible diseases, and regular people on the internet who don't know me, don't believe this is possible until they actually start reading some of the stuff that I write. They find out that I'm as serious as a heart attack. This is not hocus pocus. I will sit down and explain to you exactly how quantum entanglement, quantum superposition, the quantum Zeno effect, all these things operate inside you and how they work. And I want you to understand it. But at the
Look, it's
same time,
fascinating. If you go on your videos, I mean, you lay it out so well and so clearly, and you do deep dive and you do it with great authority, right? And so I highly recommend that people just get on and spend some hours and join your Patreon as well, where you have your 23 blogs, because it's great stuff, Dr. Jack. It really is. It's compelling.
well, I think anything that's tied to a decentralized network is compelling. Why? Because it's the most energy efficient way things work. And if you really understand what the second law of thermodynamics says, is that anything is energy efficient is favored in nature, it's favored in life. And that's the truth. That's actually what drives evolution forward. And that is really hard for people to understand. Life is not interested in doing things that are bad for energy. For example, most people understand a child learns to not touch a hot stove because you get a second or third degree burn. Well, guess what? That actually is a quantum lesson. It's the same reason why animals learn, not to jump off a cliff just because other animals do it. Now, they watch other animals do it, but eventually they get the message, maybe we shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I'm telling people right now, especially in your country and my country, we're all addicted to this M2 money supply. It's happening in Australia with, their M2 money supply. They're followed the same economic path that we have here in the States. The States have done something pretty astounding since 1971. We have devalued completely against Bitcoin. And when you denominate things in your life, like when you denominate things in Australia to Bitcoin, not to fiat, okay?
Yeah.
You begin to realize just how bad things have become in 50 years of your life. You've been probably around since 1971 to know when we went off the gold standard. I know I have.
Yeah.
And I think about it all the time. I remember in 1971 that you could buy a Ford F-150 pickup truck in the United States at that time for about $1,000 to $1,500. Today, the same car is over $100,000 US.
Yeah, milk was 30 cents and now it's $5. But I'll tell you what else we're experiencing in Australia at the moment. We are in the biggest property boom of all time.
Well, you know what that this is probably really important for people to hear, because this is going to be counterintuitive for probably a lot of your listeners, because I would imagine they're not that old. This is a lesson I learned from my grandfather. If you remember what the Roaring Twenties were in the United States, this was when we basically had a deck party on top of the Titanic for 9 years before October of 1929. In other words, everything in the United States looked awesome until it didn't.
Yeah.
And then the Great Depression hit. And that depression lasted technically all the way to 1945. The only thing that ended that depression was actually a war with Adolf Hitler, when the military and the US government got the idea, hey, this whole war thing stimulates economic growth. This is what got us out of this 15-year nightmare. It wasn't economic policy that got us out of it. It wasn't the New Deal of FDR. Actually, Adolf Hitler was the biggest boon to us getting out of the depression. And this, offends a lot of people, but economically, when you actually go back and look at history, it's true.
It's absolutely true.
Right. And here's the key that people don't realize, that we are now having a deck party on top of the Titanic again. That's why you have the property boom in Australia. We're seeing a property boom in a lot of places in the United States. But here's the thing, below the deck, we're seeing problems. I mentioned in the Clubhouse thesis with you guys that the Central Bank of Australia on 2/28/2021 bought massive buying of central bank T-bills.
Yes.
And they did that. Why? Because they're trying to extend the debt party for as long as they possibly can before the people on the deck realize that actually the Titanic is sinking. And the thing is, the people that are going to feel the pain in Australia, the people that still have a life tethered to fiat. In other words,
Exactly. Yeah.
they don't have a Satoshi-based life. They don't
Well,
understand that basically Bitcoin is a life raft that they have a ticket to, so that when the deck party's over, they can jump in that life raft and they won't succumb to the cold water of the North Atlantic like the people did in the Titanic in 1912.
look, you're absolutely right. And this speaks again to different realities, because you have the reality tunnel out there where everything is just fantastic and let's buy property and let's pay, higher prices than we've ever paid before. And then there are those of us who see that, for instance, the Australian economy, I can speak to, is a dead man walking, and it's just a matter of time before the bottom falls out, as you said, into the
Well,
water.
I mean, it's a bigger deal now, because I know that the paradigm of belief in Australia is quite a bit different than it is in the United States. I've seen how you guys have reacted to COVID. I think your population specifically has been very compliant with the government.
Oh,
You've gotten all of your, civil liberties taken away from you. And I think in Victoria, especially, it's been marked, the abuses that have gone on. But here's the key thing that I don't think people realize in Australia, that I have actually shared, with you in my clubhouse room. The reason this has been done globally is not because of the biologic effects of COVID. It's because when you're going to transform from fiat to digital currency, it's much better to devalue the currency during a time of economic despair than economic growth. So it makes total sense why you'd want to destroy an economy before you transition to a digital economy. We've already seen that China has unleashed its central bank digital coin. They also have their stable coins. The same thing likely be rolled out both in Australia and the United States when the central banks figure out how they're going to do this. Obviously, the deck party is being continued on top of the Titanic until they figure that out. And when they do figure it out, that's when the Titanic will sink. Here's what the key is. For those of us, I'm not one of those people anymore. Hopefully you're not either. If you've been in my room, I don't think you are. If you're still playing in a fiat world, you're technically subject to not having a boat on a life raft, just like the people were on the Titanic.
yeah.
If you own some Bitcoin, you technically have your own life raft, and it has air in it. The amount of air in it corresponds to how much Bitcoin you physically own. So I've told my tribe, my owners, my people that are with me, that as of December 31st, 2020, I wanted them all to have one Bitcoin. I found out something very interesting this weekend when I was doing, research for the current blog that's going to be released tomorrow, that through Glassnode, there's less than 1 million people in the world that own more than one Bitcoin.
Yes, I know. Yeah, it's
stunned.
amazing, isn't it?
No, I gotta be honest, I was stunned. And that tells me that there's a lot of people out there. They may know Bitcoin is a wise thing to do, but they're not allocating enough of their fiat. And like you said, you got all these people in Australia that are having a huge property boom. The smart move would probably be to go and take a mortgage out against your real estate that's worth something, and then transmit that fiat into Bitcoin so that you have a bigger stack.
Absolutely.
I think that's a huge factor.
But don't you think there's also some hoarding going on, that there are a few players that are holding many, many coins as well?
Well, we know that, but I mean, ultimately, guess what? Isn't that true in any capitalist system?
Yeah,
Of
yeah, that's
course.
absolutely true. Yeah.
But
I mean, it's surprising that there's so few that actually own a coin.
Well, I think it's more surprising that regular people, they need to realize, same thing with poor nations. Like I'm talking about like nations in the Middle East, like Yemen, if they get this message, or people in Nigeria get this message that they need to own Bitcoin, these potentially are going to be nation states that become wealthy overnight and could dwarf the superpowers that are present today. I've said this multiple times, that we have a CEO here in the United States who basically runs a relatively small business enterprise software company named Michael Saylor. He's put $2.2 billion of Bitcoin on his own balance sheet of his company. And this was basically done, and this is the crazy part, he did this by borrowing money in the stock market for 0% interest. Now, what he's got on his balance sheet, it's worth about $5.5 billion. So he's actually made 150% of his money for shareholders in 8 months.
That's amazing. I mean, look, honestly, I didn't even know that you could borrow against your Bitcoin until I heard you say it in the room.
Yep.
And that is revelatory as well, because you can, like you said, take a mortgage, go buy Bitcoin, and then if you need to, borrow against your Bitcoin.
Correct. You can actually lever up. You just have to be careful with that right now, as you know, because I've talked about it multiple times. We are now day 77 in the honeypot. So I think the honeypot will extend past the 4th of July this year, because the normal halving cycle tells us that the biggest gains are made between day 200 and 400 after the last halving. And the last halving in Bitcoin, which is tied to the circadian cycle that I mentioned to you earlier, Bitcoin, was May 11th of 2020. I believe because institutional money is now in, that's going to be right shifted, and the effect will probably go all the way out to Halloween, which is, October 31st of 2021. Then I think we won't go any further from there. Why? Because the normal halving cycle will take foothold, and then we'll have about a year where it'll trade sideways or go down maybe 15, 20, 30% from its top. And then as soon as it gets to the next halving cycle, which right now, by my calculations, should happen right around April of 2024. As soon as it gets to April of 2024, that is when you should lever up tremendously, because then a total new growth cycle starts, and usually it maximizes itself for about 12 to 18 months. There's many people out there that believes the models break when institutional money comes in. I'm not one of those people, because
look, I was just going to bring that up. I was kind of big into it around 2008, when I can't remember what the exact terminology is, but they put it on the market so that you could buy essentially futures and short it and all of that kind of business, right? And it sent the market out of its bullish run. Do you remember that, Darlin? 2008?
Well, 2008, Bitcoin wasn't around. Bitcoin really was around about 2010, 2011.
Yes. No, well, I'm trying to think, when did they put it on so that, they kind of put it in, not into the stock market, but they made it like a tradable community.
Well, you could use leverage on Bitcoin from the beginning in non-KYC and non-AML exchanges. Like, for example, you had, especially in Australia, you guys had access to that through Binance in China until CZ moved his exchange from China over to Switzerland. But you remember the things that changed for Bitcoin in Australia is in 2017, when there was all these ICOs that had the rug pull, where a lot of people lost money. But leverage in Australia was very possible, over 100%, from about 2011 all the way through 2017. That's never been true in the United States. The only way it was true in the United States is if you went through an exchange and did not have a KYC exchange. And that still was possible in the United States. You just had to work a little bit harder to do it. But the reason why that was the case in the United States, the reason for the Great Depression in 1929 is most people were over leveraged in 29, and they changed the Security Exchange Commission law that you could only have 50% leverage on your position going forward. And that law still exists today in the United States. That's why
Interesting.
today most people in the States can only get 50% leverage. And you probably have heard what happened with this trader from Argos, Bill Wang. This just happened literally in the last 3 or 4 days, where he was leveraged up between 50 to 80 billion dollars, but he only had $10 billion of assets. So his leverage amount was about 8-fold. And primary brokers like Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Nomura lent this guy tremendous money, and he basically lost his ass. Wow. And these stocks have gotten destroyed. Well, that kind of stuff is protected, usually in the United States, but it goes to show you Bill Wang is a Korean American. And even now in the hedge fund world, you're able to do things that you shouldn't be able to do. And it turns out that in a centralized system like we have in the States, that if the primary brokers don't know what Bill's doing with Goldman Sachs and what he's doing with Credit Suisse and doing with Nomura, somebody can still get huge amount of leverage to create this issue. And the reason why this is a big deal is this is actually what happened with long-term capital management in '98. And that was the precursor event to what brought us to 2008, when we had the failure of, the subprime mortgage issue, because the leverage there was exactly the same as we're seeing today. And, what happened with GameStop and Robinhood, 4 weeks ago, and what's happened with this guy, Bill Wang, in my opinion, in about 9 or 10 months, we're going to face hyperinflation and devaluation in the United States. And because we're the SWIFT currency, we are going to export our hyperinflation to your country. Yeah, we're gonna send it everywhere through the world. And the problem is people don't realize that this is what's going to happen. And this is the reason why doing podcasts like this, for people to be aware of how the plumbing of the financial system is really stacked against them because it's centralized, and why I spend so much of my life trying to teach people about biology being plugged into the decentralized system of nature. Bitcoin's the only algorithm that I've ever found that I can tell you, because most people who know me on the biology side, I fucking hate technology.
Yeah.
But Bitcoin is the one algorithm that I can tell you that actually operates just the way a cell operates.
So, Dr. Jack, if I may ask you, we're talking about, they're going to lower the economy so that they can switch over to or reset the currency, right? And to me, that makes me think of the Great Reset, in which they're promising a future where you own nothing and you will be happy as part of this reset in currency. They want to reset so many other things. I mean, do you have concerns about this post-reset world?
Well, I do. I have a lot of concerns about it. I've talked to my members about it. In fact, I spent almost 3 months out of the United States in October, November, December, meeting with my members, about 26, 27 members, while we're in Mexico talking about this issue. Can this economic reset, which was begun with a biologic reset, I call COVID the great facade. Why? Everybody believes that COVID was a really big biologic issue. That's completely not true, because even if you look at global numbers, the amount of people that died was minuscule. It approaches
kind of standard flu season death numbers.
Exactly. 99.98% of people survive. But when you look at the way the governments throughout the world responded, you would have thought we faced a pandemic like we did in 1918 when we lost 100 million people. And that's not true. It did not happen. So you have to begin, if you're not brain dead, to ask yourself the question, why is it that there was such a political overreaction globally to this event. Why? Because it wasn't about this event. It was about creating a scenario so that we could get to a global economic reset. And that global economic reset is to bring in digital currencies. That is because we are at the end of a global debt crisis that began after World War II with Bretton Woods. And when the United States took control of the oceans of the world from England, the biggest loser in World War II was England. And this is the irony.
Yes.
They were on the side of the United States, but they lost more. And, you know, a girl like you from Australia knows this because you guys, I remember in the beginning of Queen Elizabeth's reign, she came and had a visit with you guys in the 50s. I think it was in 52, if I'm not mistaken, which was the last time the Queen came down there to rule over the people of Australia before you guys got your independence. And
yes,
basically things broke free from that time. And what happened from there is the imperialism from the 19th century in Britain, which was tied to both Australia, India, different places in Europe, even as far away as South America and the Caribbean. Britain lost their imperialism, their power, even though Churchill tried to do everything possible at the Treaty of Yalta to preserve it. It didn't work. Why? Because the United States basically took over the control of all the seas, that controlled all global trade in the world. And because they had that control, they became the global reserve currency. And it extended itself because we made sure that oil throughout the world was also, you know, tied to the petrodollar. So everybody went along with this. Why? And this is the truth. And I'm telling you, this is American. Nobody wanted to fuck with the American military. The power of the American dollar is based in the American military. Everybody knows it. Not everybody in the world likes it, but it is what it is.
Yes.
Here's the problem. When the American military and government realized by 1971, there was a significant downside of being the world reserve currency. That's fundamentally one of the reasons why we got off the gold standard. And here's the interesting part of the story that a lot of people in the world, I don't think, know. When this was decided by the Nixon administration in August of 1971, do you know that it was called a temporary removal from that standard? Well, that temporary removal is now going on its 50th anniversary this August. And that's kind of what happens in the United States. When we enact temporary measures, they tend to become permanent.
I was just going to say, I think it's like what a year after a week lockdown, it was supposed to, a temporary lockdown was supposed
Correct.
to be, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, you guys faced the same thing as we did. You know, we joke about it, but it's really not a joking matter when you really understand how dire the situation is. What was the real effect of the COVID lockdown? It was to destroy the economy, to put us into a global recession. Why did they do that? It turns out when you devalue a currency, it's much better to do it when the economy is in the tank versus when the economy is humming. That's part of the reason why the people that were in power in the Beltway in the United States didn't like Trump. Why? Because Trump was leading the best economic revival in the United States that was possible. And that was a problem. Literally, COVID ended that economy overnight. And the problem was, I hate to say it, Trump wasn't smart enough to realize it. And then he even put people in control like Fauci that really sunk his own ship. And I don't think he realized it. And before he realized it, it was already too late. The bottom line is we're now globally all in the same boat. And you know what the key is?
Bitcoin.
Well, the key is, I'm going to tell you, it's a little bit more than Bitcoin.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you that the people in Australia, the people in the United States, the people in England, the people in France, the people in Africa, the people in South America need to realize realistically what you and I are talking about now, that all governments are against taxpayers, no matter where they are at. And the real vaccine that we all need is Bitcoin, not the COVID-19 vaccine. And when you take Bitcoin as that vaccine, you're going to insulate yourselves from the power of the World Economic Forum, the IMF, and the WHO, because I've got news for you. When this real flu bug comes, which is the economic reset, it is going to destroy people's lives who live their life based in fiat, not based in Satoshi. And that is the key.
Dr. Jack, I absolutely hear you. And, I feel very sad because, as I mentioned, I'm talking to my girlfriend and I'm talking to people about, the reality of the COVID situation and the agendas behind it and
Why do you
their
feel sad?
realities.
Tell me why you feel sad.
Sorry?
You shouldn't feel sad. You shouldn't feel sad. You know why? Your job with your podcast is to make sure that people hear this idea. It's radically different than what your girlfriends are. You know what I'm going to tell you? I'm going to be nasty now. I'm going to tell you that your girlfriends are people you probably shouldn't be hanging out with. You know why? What does evolution do with the baby seal that's bleeding when it jumps in the water in Australia and there's great white sharks?
The shark eats it. Yes.
Correct. Well, guess what? Your girlfriends that think that you speak in forked tongue and speak with hyperbole, you know what?
The shark's going to get them. Yeah.
No, let them get what they get. You know what the key is for you? You need to keep spreading your truth when you do your podcast. Why? Because there's people down in Australia that I'm sure have not even heard these ideas yet. And
no, it's amazing. We need to get this word out here. Absolutely, darling. No, there are people.
And that's why I'm telling you that it's amazing on Clubhouse that you and I crashed in Clubhouse. You didn't find me from the biology side. You found me on the Clubhouse side. You found me on the finance side. And you found out that I'm 10% really crypto, but I'm really 90% biology. And you're starting to realize, just as I've told my own members, that the current events right now mean that you need to focus 90% on crypto and 10% on biology, because eventually, once you get the wealth, then you can reestablish really where you want to live down the road once we get through the next 3-4 years. Because I got news for you. This economic reset is not going to happen, totally without any bloodshed or any other problems for the next probably 3 or 4 years. In the United States, I think it's going to go past the next election. And I mean the next midterm, but also the next presidential election. I personally believe, and I've said this, that Biden is going to get taken out by the 25th Amendment, by people in the government. They'll blame the economic reset on a president that is senile. Then they'll install Kamala Harris, who's known as a liberal left-wing politician. When those policies destroy economic value in the United States, what will they do? She will be the poster child. They will blame her. Who's the goal here, Venice? It's so the bankers never get the dart or the gun targeted to them. You got it. It's going to be always targeted to the politician. And then eventually, what will happen in 2024? Somebody new will come in. It's going to be somebody that I guarantee you people on in Australia have never heard of before. It'll be a new face.
A new Obama, really. Like, we didn't know about Obama. And they were like, who's Obama? And voila.
Most people in the United States didn't know about Obama either, but he was selected by, the deep state because he ran the same program that Lyndon Baines Johnson wrote, that Nixon wrote, that Reagan wrote, that Clinton wrote, that Bush wrote. Obama just followed along. The guy that kind of broke everything up was Trump. And you saw how people throughout the world and even people in the United States reacted to Trump. Everybody thought Trump was an asshole, but the truth be told, he actually was for the people. And you want to know the ultimate irony for me as an American?
Yeah.
You know that I'm a Bitcoiner. I actually said to my nurse today, we were talking about this. I was a big Trump supporter. Here I am now. What is today? March 31st. We are now about 2.5 months into Biden's presidency. I am the biggest fan of Biden because he is going to make me ridiculously wealthy because of Bitcoin. Trump wouldn't have done that.
Oh, that's so funny.
But Biden absolutely will. So in other words, I cut the umbilical cord on the political side, and I realized the economic side, Biden will reinflate my Bitcoin stack faster than any president ever could.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, your guy, Morrison over there, I feel the same way. I see the shit that's going on over there. But the thing is, I just think the apathy of the Australian population to do what you guys have done. A lot of you down there believe that we're, rebels because we still have the Second Amendment. I think one of the big things that I think a lot of people in Australia are starting to wake up to, maybe when they took our guns away 10 years ago, that wasn't such a smart thing.
Look, I don't know, sweetie. I think we have a situation here where we're contented cows. I mean, we were convicts, right? We were the rebels, but we've had such a long time of peace and prosperity that we have become mush.
I agree with that.
There's handfuls of people here and there that are trying to do things, but the majority of people, and we have this thing called the tall poppy syndrome. So if somebody does put their head up and say, hey, we've got to look at this, the amount of flack that is attracted to you to cut you down I've never seen anything like it in the United States. I mean, people are.
The United States is definitely not what Australia is. I will tell you, when I look at Australia, because I have a lot of members in Australia, that's why I'm being very careful what I say in this podcast. Yes. But I will tell you, you are a country that is afflicted with Stockholm syndrome.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, with what they were able to get away with in Melbourne was just outrageous. And I'm from Melbourne originally, and I had many friends that were just, we can do this, keep the faith. And I'm like, oh my, please, just it was traumatic for me to witness that. Even
I just want everybody down there to know that this really isn't a biologic problem, that it's really an economic one. I want everybody to put Windex on their glass eyes and realize that in the next 9 to 12 months, I hope you release your podcast relatively soon.
Oh, I'm going to do it today. Don't worry.
Tell me when the link goes out, because you know what my bet is? When the shit does hit the fan down there, then you'll be able to tell your girlfriends that didn't listen to you. So here, you thought I was an idiot. You thought that I was speaking out my mouth. What do you think now? Now that you see generational wealth taken away from people, in the boomer population in Australia, how are you going to react to this now? Because that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, look, it's going to be one of the less sweet I told you so's and as I said, I'm not, I'm having a hard time with this shark situation, but I do hear you, and I absolutely agree, Dr. Jack. Do you think America's ever going to reclaim the joyful time of the 70s and the sunshine and the wealth? And
I do. People? I would just tell you, and this is, I don't know how good a historian you are of the United States. I think you've learned something probably from me in Clubhouse, that I'm a really big stickler about United States history. Yes. When you think about how bad things were in the United States in the 1920s all the way up to 1944, that generation, that was my grandfather's generation, put up with unbelievable hardship. But I will tell you, from 1950 to really 1965, America was absolutely the best place in the world to be. Everything that was written down in the Constitution was operational and effective.
Yes.
Ever since they killed Kennedy, things have been on a downward trend for literally 60 years in the United States. And I'm going to be honest with you. I personally think the apathy for the American voter and in the United States, they haven't realized this whole left versus right thing was what the deep state wanted to do. It's classic Sun Tzu.
Yeah. Divide and
Divide
conquer.
and conquer.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And the people here have been so stupidized and dumbed down by blue screens, non-native EMF and technology that it's lowered their dopamine levels, that they really don't understand physically what the government's been up to. And the government has been doing this to gain control. And they're gaining control because the Federal Reserve from 1913 all the way to today has absolutely created business cycles that create wars and debt cycles. We're at the end of a debt cycle. And this debt cycle is off the chain. We're $30 trillion in debt.
I know. I can't even imagine what this depression is going to be like compared to the other.
I got news for you. If you own Fiat alone, get ready for the biggest ass whipping you could ever imagine. I think I've told people, I've told my friends, you've heard me say in Clubhouse. 25 years is what I expect in the United States. Okay. I believe people in sub-Saharan Africa, countries there, will have a better existence than people in Missouri, better than people in California, better than people in Tennessee. And you know what? Americans, when I say that, they think this is hyperbole because Americans are fat, lazy, comfortable because they've never faced any hardship since 1929 to 1945.
I know, it's just, look, as we look at ancient history, you know, and I mean, there's been so much history between ancient Egypt and now, and even recent history has been completely struck from education. And you know, if you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it. And
well, just think about the ancient Egyptians. Look at Egypt now, and then think about this civilization that created the Great Pyramid. Are those countries, you know, generally over time things should get better? Has Egypt gotten better? No.
No.
In fact, their glory time happened about 4,000 years ago. And you know what? That should be an operational lesson to those in the United States, those in Europe, and those in Australia.
Oh, my dear. Well, you know, may we live in interesting times is what they say in China. I am so grateful. I just want to say I'm so grateful that I stumbled upon you or crashed into you. And it's so interesting. I did an interview the other day, and the woman I was interviewing was like, I just got onto this Dr. Jack. And I'm like, oh my God, so did I. And I think that you're reaching a level of exposure that is just wonderful, Dr. Jack. And I'm very blessed that you're allowing me to help spread the word, because there is some serious wisdom in that brain of yours, sir.
Well, I mean, the goal, people don't realize, as a neurosurgeon, the word surgeon means to teach. My job is to teach people. Generally, I do it on the biology side, but I happen to have a pretty good mastery of history and of economics. And when you understand the reason why I have that and why I try to impart this to people, I'm pretty passionate about finance, because the more financial freedom you have, that means the more you can control your environment so that you can optimize your health. That's the real key.
Yes. And I love you. I love personally, I'm threatening it that you locked your wife out of the house because she wasn't paying attention to the wisdom that you have in terms of the sunlight situation. I've threatened my husband with the same. So
you're probably not going to like what I'm going to tell you next.
Okay.
Actually divorced her.
Oh, wow.
Because it led to further problems.
Okay.
In her health. And I always tell people it's very, very difficult to get people to change, especially these are people that you care about.
Yes.
You know, your parents, your family members, they tend never to listen to you when you care about them. So you usually have to show them what life looks like without you in it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
my real passion right now is that my kids realize that what their mom did is not what I want them to do. Why? Because that woman gave both of those children the mitochondria they have. And if those children don't understand how vitally important those mitochondria are with the environment they choose, they're going to suffer the same fate as their mother.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know what? As a physician, I can't lay in my coffin and feel like I didn't do something about it. And I will tell you, and I'm going to be very honest with you when I say this, I know there's going to be a lot of people that listen to what I just said to you now, and they're not going to understand it. They're going to hate me for what I just said and what I did. But I'm going to tell you right now, that's how passionate I am about getting this right, because I look at it like this. If you have an A available and you settle for a B, C, or D because it keeps the peace in the house, then you haven't done enough in your own house for your children to live an optimized life.
Look, Dr. Jack, you're a wise man and you walk your talk, and as I said, I'm so blessed to have met you and to have this opportunity to speak with you and to share your wisdom with my audience. And I just want to say thank you so much. I will tag this with all of your information and your Patreon so that they can find you. But thank you so much, Dr. Jack, for your time.
No problem. Anytime. It was a pleasure.
You have a wonderful evening, my love, and I'll see you in Clubhouse.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.